Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Good evening. Or should I say good night? It's 10:52 p.m. here on the East Coast. It is 72 degrees outside right now, y'all. It is beautiful weather out. We have some massive news going on in Ukraine and Russia. We got Ukraine telling Russia front lines to evacuate. So I'm not 100% sure about what's going to go down there, but we will talk about it in the show today. You don't want to miss about what we got going on today. So we got Putin furious. He's madder than mug. He raising Cain, man. He is raising Cain, and I'm not even talking about the general either. But anyway, no pun intended. But anyway, some shout outs right now. We have AZ App Growth 1. Appreciate the follow. Tomcats, appreciate the follow. 1 second. We have a couple more here, y'all. Well, if I can work my hand today. We have KY Muck F7U05. Appreciate the follow. Druck C and Pool Bag 7 Your. Man, hey, look, the names are great, man, but y'all must, it had to take a minute for y'all to think about them. 3 I can't say that on air, but yeah. Thank y'all for the follow. Man, it means a lot. Appreciate all y'all. All y'all dropping a follow like that or subscribing. It helps push our videos out. It helps get the actual news and real news out there so everybody can actually hear and understand about what's going on in the world instead of being in the dark, you know? But anyways, let's get to the news, y'all.
We have very big news coming out of Ukraine and the Middle East as well. But we're currently hearing that Ukraine is now warning Russia to evacuate the front lines amid a major logistics collapse that we've been covering for the last few days. And Putin came out today and was angry as hell and coping to the extreme. We've also seen that Putin is now expanding bases along the entire NATO border in a bombshell report that just came out today. And also, Moscow's erupted in complete chaos amid gas shortages, and the Muscovites are asking why that is the case, and Putin has no answers for them, and it's absolutely horrible right now in Moscow. But it's good to see you all once again.
And of course, we're going to be covering the past 24 hours of the news from around the world, and today we're particularly going to be focusing on the war in Ukraine, as significant developments have unfolded over the course of the past 24 hours that appear to be monumental and even war-changing, despite all of the other war-changing developments that we have seen over the past 4 years. As we have been able to hear that the Ukrainian government official Sternenko has announced today that Ukrainian civilians and the Russian armed forces should evacuate from the southern front regions due to the complete supply line collapse within the region, and also insinuated that there is a decent possibility that the Ukrainian armed forces may be conducting a surprise offensive within the area to retake the territory after the Russian Federation's armed forces are now depleted completely of supply and will be incapable of maneuvering, defending, or firing upon the Ukrainian attacking forces.
Now, this is where Russia, or Putin, should I say, this is where he should say, look, we've lost over 1 million guys, almost 2,000, I'm sorry, almost 2 million, at that matter. So this should be like, hey, look, hold on a minute, man, we're losing too many people. They're losing so many people that they can't even hold their employment rate up. Because all the people that actually should be working in the factories and the mills and the oil factories and stuff like that is literally being put on the front lines in Russia. Like it's nonsense and insane. So we found out sending your farmers to war is a terrible idea. Terrible idea. But that's my point of view.
Forces which may be descending upon the region within the next coming weeks or months. We've also been able to additionally hear that in the course of these announcements, Ukrainian drone forces have once again conducted attacks across the whole of the Crimean Peninsula, with significant strikes being seen around Armyansk and the Chonhar Gap over the night. We have been able to confirm today that the Ukrainian armed forces successfully destroyed the now repaired pontoon bridge at the Chonhar Gap, and the bridge is now no longer operational, and the Chonhar Gap has been completely knocked out. At the moment, no road berm has also been created over the dry canal at the city of Armyansk as well, and the Ukrainians also hit the critical chemicals plant just north of the city of Armyansk, also destroying significant war production capabilities of the Russian Federation. At this moment, this now means that Crimea has been completely cut off from supply, and not only that, the Kerch Bridge is now being closed for a whopping 12 hours at this moment after attacks were conducted in the area last night, and it now appears that the Russian occupational authorities are increasingly concerned that if the bridge is reopened, something may happen to it that will lead it to being completely knocked out and destroyed. Fuel supplies have completely disappeared in Crimea over the course of the day as well, and fuel lines for the gas stations are now quite literally filling the highways leading up to the gas stations multiple miles deep, and some people have now been waiting in the lines at the gas stations for several days for fuel that no longer exists within the whole of the Crimean Peninsula. Additionally, we have also been able to hear that it now appears that panic buying is being conducted in Rostov-on-Don, the very epicenter of Russian supply networks heading into occupied Ukraine, including Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, and Donetsk, and it may be soon before we start to hear that the Rostov Oblast is also running into complete supply shortages or complete lacks of available fuel and diesel to be able to provide to the public and to the general transportation apparatus that keeps the Russian Federation's armed forces operational within those areas. Additionally, we've also been able to hear that the Russian Federation's capital city has also descended into absolute panic today as well, as the cities of Moscow and St. Petersburg have now entered what appears to be a critical supply state for available fuels, with 20 liters per purchase per customer being the maximum allowed limit in both capital cities.
Man, it's absurd. Like, the situation in Moscow right now is so bad. It's really absurd, too, because you'll see in the videos that we'll get to here in a little bit that there are expensive cars galore all over the capital city at these gas stations, completely out of gas. And they're sitting there complaining and griping nonstop on the videos about why Putin is not helping them as they're sitting there with their $100,000 Mercedes at the gas station. Really absurd.
It really is absolutely absurd. In the midst of this collapsing supply situation in Moscow and St. Petersburg, the historical capital of the Russian Federation and the active capital of the Russian Federation, we've also been able to hear that almost a dozen other oblasts have also entered a critical supply availability of fuels over the course of the day, including most of the oblasts surrounding the Moscow region and Moscow city. In the midst of this, Vladimir Putin did come out today and appeared to be in what can only be described as an absolute delusion, claiming that the Russian Federation's armed forces are facing almost no setbacks on the front today, and that they are advancing on all fronts against Ukrainian armed forces and are winning the war in general. We've also been able to hear in a bombshell statement and news report today that the Russian Federation is actively working on and constructing new bases, almost over a dozen of them, along the NATO borders in the Leningrad Military Oblast. It is believed that these constructions and refurbishments are being conducted with the idea of a hypothetical war with NATO occurring at some point in the future. Further air incursions have also been noted by the Swedes within the Baltic Sea, and the Swedish Air Force has had to respond to these situations over the course of the day, which are becoming increasingly concerning to the Swedes, and the Swedish government is continuing to telegraph to most of Europe that it does appear that Russia is putting itself into a hostile footing within the area of the Baltic Sea, and it doesn't appear that this is going to be going away at any point within the near future. We've also been able to report on other significant drone attacks within the Russian Federation itself, with drone attacks striking Oriol, the city of Novomakovsk, within the area of the Tula Oblast, and a major pumping station also being hit and knocked out within the northern Volgograd region. We've also seen that the facility at Nizhnekamsk is still on fire and burning as of today. The Ukrainian armed forces have also been able to see that the Russian Federation has lost a significant amount of manpower and equipment on the front lines, with major attacks being conducted along most of the front, causing high losses for the Russian army. And we've also been able to see that two major rail hubs have also been hit and heavily damaged within the occupied areas of the Donbass today, including the massive rail hub of Ilovaisk to the outskirts of Donetsk, and also the major rail hub of Alchevsk to the west of Luhansk, both serving as the endpoint railheads for final supply distribution within the Donbass, also showing that the Ukrainians are now targeting and destroying the traditional supply apparatus that the Russian Federation uses to keep their offensives within the Donbass stable and operational at some minimal level. We've also been able to hear of some developments within the Middle East over the course of the day, as Israel and Hezbollah have have been continuing to exchange significant amounts of fire today. While in the midst of this, we've also been able to see that there are warring factions, or more so, generally combating factions that are now beginning to appear within the Islamic Republic of Iran over the course of the day, after the president stated that they had been able to come up with a deal with the Islamic Republic of Iran and that the signing of the deal would be occurring tomorrow. Members of the Basij and the IRGC went out into the streets in Tehran and organized pro-government rallies demanding for the hanging of the foreign minister Abbas Araghchi, which then led to other factions in support of Abbas Araghchi and other elements of the IRGC Council and others to deploy the special forces to be able to dispatch the Basij and IRGC that were in the streets, largely inciting what we could describe as a riot within the city. We will be making sure to go over all of these developments over the course of the day, starting with our largest stories first and then moving our way on down into the smaller stories throughout the night. But suffice it to say,
I got to tell you, man, I'm excited for this one tonight because we got a lot of stuff coming up, and that's going to be actually kind of hilarious in a certain degree, because Putin's been yapping all day long about how Russia's advancing on the front lines, they're winning, that Ukraine can't withstand the Russian might. And in the meantime, inside their own capital city, it's like mayhem in the streets, chaos, and just absolute, it's absurd what's going on inside of Moscow right now. I would say that the war has returned back to the Russian Federation. I would say the objective has been completed.
Without a doubt, it has absolutely been completed. And so, moving us on into the major news for the night, which is actually going to be getting into the Moscow news and the frontline news in the south immediately, we are going to be moving on into the area of the southern front of Ukraine, which has started to become a crisis point, if any could be described as such, for the Russian Federation's armed forces at this point of the war. Many of y'all will know that for weeks we have covered the continued Ukrainian medium-range drone attacks, which have brought the M14 highway, the critical supply line for the entirety of the southern front that the Russian Federation currently occupies and operates out of, under attack, leading to major losses of supply trucks and also the intermittent attacks against Russian trains, which are also operating within this area to provide supplies, most importantly fuel, to the Crimean Peninsula and also the rest of the southern regions. At this point, we have been able to report over the past week and a half that the supply situation has clearly entered a critical state, as the entirety of the 337th Regiment of the Russian Armed Forces has retreated out of the Kinburn Spit and appears to have fallen back to the areas around Pomyante and Chulakivka to try and get a little bit closer to the remaining operational supply lines, considering that their position had become strategically untenable due to the loss of supplies and the lack of supply availability on the Kinburn Spit itself. We then were able to report not long after that the Ukrainian drone attacks were also beginning to conduct attacks and destroy the only entrances to the Crimean Peninsula of any strategic use, including the Chonhar Bridge and the Armyansk Bridge. Both of these bridges have been attacked and destroyed over the course of the past few days, leading to the Crimean Peninsula effectively being shut off from the outside world, save for the Kerch Bridge, which has a significant weight limitation on it of 1.5 tons, meaning that no commercial trucks or supply trucks can actually cross over the Kerch Bridge, meaning that materially Crimea is already isolated via the supply lines, but civilians can still leave Crimea over the Kerch Bridge. It's just that it cannot be anything larger than a small car. In the midst of this, the Ukrainians have come out today and made an interesting statement, a very interesting one, from none other than Sergei Sternenko. And we'll actually be reading this off right here, at least the transcription below, of what Sternenko said today about the situation in the southern front and what the Ukrainians are generally viewing as their future intentions in the region. And Ivan Fedorov, the head of the Zaporizhia OVA, called, and I also joined this call. I know that many Ukrainians in the temporarily occupied territories are watching me. He called on the residents of the occupied part of the Zaporizhia region, and I would add the Kherson and Donetsk regions, to evacuate if possible, because the Russians will have very large problems. They won't have logistics. In Crimea, the problem will even be bigger, far bigger. Crimea will turn into an island for the larger part. This will be the toughest summer for our opponent.
Honestly, man, I believe him on that. I believe him 100%. It's already shaping out to be one of the worst years for the front line for the Russian forces. It's already shaping up to be that. But what that sounds like to me, you can tell me if you agree with this or not, but it sounds like to me that Sternenko here, who, by the way, is an advisor to the Minister of Defense of Ukraine, so he's a very influential figure, to say the least. He's basically telling them that they're planning on launching an offensive once the logistics collapse. That's the way I'm taking it.
I would say that that's definitely the case. It looks like he's largely insinuating that the supply collapse is complete and there's really no way around this at this point, rather than to leave the region, because there's quite literally going to be no supplies. The region will be inhospitable as a result. And also, I don't know if y'all got this as well, but it seemed to me like the statement is also largely insinuating that something is going to be coming around to this region more than just a complete supply loss. Like, for example, a counteroffensive within the region, much like we saw in the summer of 2023, which this time around, because the Russians are completely unsupplied, might have a very high chance of breaking through the Surovikin line near Robotny and pushing on down and into the city of Melitopol, severing the land bridge and leaving Kherson and Crimea completely isolated from the rest of the Russian Federation, even on the map. That's something that I think I'm getting out of this as well for the larger part today, and I would have to say that there is a high likelihood at this point, given the strategic situation of the Russian armed forces and the combined arms armies which are operating in Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, that there is a high likelihood that a wise Ukrainian strategist would take advantage of the situation and use the superior firepower in this local situation against the Russians to overwhelm them, break through their lines, and completely sever the Russian land bridge in two. If that happens, most of the Russian forces in Kherson and Crimea are going to be faced with the hard options. They're either going to be faced with the idea of absolute destruction with really no viable path of retreat, even across the Kerch Bridge, which may be destroyed at that point completely, or they may have to surrender to the armed forces of Ukraine, which might be the single largest mass surrender that we've seen in the entirety of Europe since the mass surrender of the German forces at the end of World War II in 1945. That would seem to me to be the likely options that we're going to be seeing the Russian army having to deal with here in the very near future, especially if the situation does not change. And if we look at the M14 highway today, the situation is not changing for the better for the Russian Federation. It is still continuing to change for the worse. More videos are still coming out along the highway, even at Russian checkpoints on the M14, showing that Russian air defense groups at these checkpoints are having to watch helplessly as supply trucks down the road are being mauled to pieces by the Ukrainian medium-range drones, which are still preying on every supply truck which is traveling down the M14. This clip right here actually comes from what we believe to be the eastern side of Melitopol along the M14 highway on one of the checkpoints leading into the city. These soldiers here had to just watch off in the distance, right there at the corner of that tree line, as Ukrainian FPV drones struck and destroyed another supply truck that was bringing in supplies to keep them at their posts and to keep the Russian army only 20 miles north operational and continuing to be able to defend or fight against the Ukrainians on the front. Here's that clip that we saw today.
Где?
And there's the hit.
Отработал, мужики.
Look at these goobers, man. I covered this in a short video earlier today. Who needs enemies when you have soldiers like this that literally just sit there and stare at the thing coming in, and then once it hits and destroys the thing because they haven't done their job, then they just walk off like, we'll call that a day. We're going home to eat.
Well, you know what's interesting is that they really can't do anything interesting enough in this whole scenario. That truck is well farther away than 400 yards, and the effective engagement distance of an AK in a perfect world is about roughly 500 yards, or really more so 450. So that drone and that trunk was out of range of their rifle fire, and also considering that none of them have optics, as we look here at their AKs, every single one of them is iron sights only with absolutely no optics equipped. All they can really do is just helplessly stand there and watch as the supplies that they were supposed to be issued are destroyed down the street out of range.
Oh, man, they could at least fire something. Because, you know, that's never stopped the Russians before. The Russians always whip out the AK for air defense, which, by the way, is a horrible weapon for air defense for the most part. But they'll whip out the AK and they'll simply fire some rounds in the air to at least make it look like they attempted to shoot it down. Because, you know, we see that all the time. Like, they'll whip out AKs and try to shoot stuff across town for the most part. So but these guys didn't even make an attempt to look like they were trying to do something. They just stood there. Then once it hit, they just wandered off like, whatever. It was like, that was very defeatist looking.
I mean, I think at this point, man, this is also showing the fact that they didn't even try, that the morale is extremely low. They feel hopeless. They feel helpless. There's no point in even putting up resistance because it largely would be pointless. And they also know that there's no chance in hell that the situation can be turned around for them down here. If anything, the fact that you're bringing that up, that they didn't do anything, might be showing us that their morale is absolutely through the floor, at as low as it could be. And they don't even feel motivated to even try to stop an attack that is generally a little bit out of range for them, but they still still could make an attempt like you're saying. So I guess that is showing they are about absolutely checked out at this point down near Melitopol. And by the way, it's very important to point out that it's Melitopol where this happened, because Melitopol is the epicenter of Russian operations here on the southern front right now in Zaporizhia. This is the equivalent, at least in this region, of Sevastopol or Rostov-on-Don or Donetsk City. If it was not for Melitopol, the Russian Federation would not have the supply capability or the logistics hub to be able to operate their forces within this region. And so showing that the forces here and their morale is so low that they're just watching helplessly as supply trucks that almost made it to the city are destroyed on the outskirts is giving us an idea it's almost over for them. Further on down the highway, somewhere in between Berdyansk and Melitopol, we also saw that more trucks were continuing to be targeted and hit, including this fuel truck, which appears to have busted wide open after the attack and started to burn across the whole of the highway.
And who are all these people just wandering up and down the highway?
Hobos, vagrants? I don't really know.
I mean, that's an interesting thing. I didn't notice that when I watched it earlier, but there's just people wandering down the highway like zombies looking at the fire. It's like, this is an active roadway.
Honestly, that is kind of weird now that you mention it. I mean, there is just a whole bunch of, like, there's more of them up there. There's like a little crowd of them wandering up to the truck. It's kind of like moths to a flame, whenever they see a fire, they all just like spawn in and they just start walking towards it. Really interesting, honestly. But still, shutting down the whole highway in the midst of this attack, and once again showing that the M14 has largely become completely unusable anywhere past Mariupol. Really, honestly, we've seen that attacks have also been conducted between Mariupol and Taganrog. It's just not at the same intensity that we're seeing between Mariupol to Melitopol, and that's why we're seeing that the route from Mariupol to Melitopol is the highway of hell for the larger part, or the highway to hell as we've dubbed it here on the channel, because it doesn't really seem like many of them making to Melitopol. It seems like a lot of the people who make the trip down the highway end up making their final trip to hell. Moving us on out of that, however, and on up and into the area, well, actually on over and into the areas around the Crimean Peninsula, the Ukrainians have also done their best work today and worked their damnedest to make sure that the Russians' workarounds to the strikes at Chanhar Gap and Armyansk wouldn't be in vain, considering that both of those bridges have been completely knocked out. Many of y'all will know that yesterday we showed you all the satellite photography that had been made, showing that the Russians had either been able to repair the pontoon or it brought in a new pontoon to make sure that road crossings were still being conducted within the area. We can actually see that pontoon right here, and from what we understand, while this certainly does not allow for the kind of traffic that the original bridge allowed for, which was two-way traffic continuously, this still allowed for a slight trickle of supplies to make it in and out of Crimea, the very little that was attempting to get in or out. The Ukrainians took note of this as well by the satellite footage, and we did get to see that last night the Ukrainian armed forces went and have officially destroyed the pontoon bridge at Chanhar for good. And we were able to see this footage right here showing the pontoon bridge. There it is right here. It appears that they're actually in the process of attempting to assemble it at that point once more, and it had been knocked out and completely destroyed a second time.
Also, what were they trying to do? Assemble the pontoon bridge? Why was it in like 3 different pieces like that? I couldn't figure that out earlier.
I don't really know. I think they might do that because this looks like it might have been a nighttime attack that this was conducted during. Maybe they separate or sever the center area of the pontoon bridge at like in the dawn or dusk times and then move it over to the side for the night. I'm not entirely sure why they do that, actually. Maybe it's because there's
I thought maybe they were trying to like assemble it because Ukraine just hit the Chanhar Bridge like a couple of days ago. So I was wondering, it's like maybe they just brought the pieces in and they were trying to put them together like Legos or something, and they were simply not quite there yet, and Ukraine hit it before they even assembled it.
I'm not thinking that that's the case, because the satellite footage that we saw from yesterday showed that the pontoon bridge had been assembled and they were using it. So they couldn't have been in the process of still putting it together, because then we wouldn't have the satellite footage here of trucks actively crossing it. So I think what they do is that once it starts getting close to nighttime, maybe they don't have any soldiers to man the pontoon bridge and to marshal the traffic, so they just shut it down and make sure that nobody crosses, so they sink the bridge. Because too many vehicles might get on it at one time. They just sever the midsection and then move it over towards the original bridge to stop people from crossing. I also saw Robert Hall say tides. It might actually be tides that they're doing that for as well. I'm not particularly sure, but to me, this seems like something they've done after the fact, during the nighttime hours to try and apparently stop people from crossing, or to make or factor in the tides, maybe.
Maybe so. Whatever the case is at this point, that middle section of the bridge will not be returning back to its original position, just to say the least, because now it's exploded. So I guess at the end of the day, I said what I said. It is what it is. At the end of the day, this thing is gone. So, I mean, I'll say this. I think the Ukrainians fixed their bridge problem permanently.
Honestly, I think they did. And also, to list off all of the targets that they hit last night, this is a still image of one of the strikes that was conducted, and we're about to be getting into some very important ones here. Because a lot of people have been saying, and this has been a great point by many people, well, they've been blowing up the road bridges, but what about the railroad bridges, though? And that's actually a good point. The railroad bridges are critically important, and many of y'all will know, and many people who've been around the channel for a good while know, that I absolutely love trains. That's more of a side note, but the important side of that is that because I love trains, I have found out a long time ago, years ago, that the Russian Federation's army and most of their supply lines don't really run primarily off of truck-based infrastructure. Most of it is operated off of rail-based infrastructure. In fact, the Russian Federation is one of the few armies in the world, I believe it's the only one standing at this point, that actually has a rail transportation corps, which is charged with the responsibility of running trains in wartime conditions near to frontline areas. That means that the Russian Federation's rail corridors and rail accesses into an area for supply are even more important than the road accesses in most conditions. And that means that we can see that this report right here in this little picture is a fairly important one. What y'all are looking at here is the already damaged and hit Chonhar Railway Bridge, which is over here just to the west of the Chonhar Road Bridge. This is the Chonhar Road Bridge, which we were just talking about a minute ago, where they had set up the pontoon. This is the Chonhar Railway Bridge right over here. This is the railway bridge, the only one that leads into Crimea from the land bridge. And they have apparently knocked this bridge out over the course of the night, or have at least warped the structural integrity of one span of the railroad bridge to where it will either be operating under reduced weight instances due to the structural integrity of the bridge being compromised, or it might be completely knocked out of service, meaning that even railroad traffic into Crimea will now be completely knocked out. The pontoon bridge, which we already covered before, had been hit over the course of the night, along with the checkpoint at Dzhankoy, which I'll show y'all right up here. This is the Dzhankoy checkpoint right around here. This was also hit last night.
Do we know if they got any of the logistics trucks waiting over there? Because there's also a little parking area that's somewhere over there as well that Ukraine also hit, apparently, which is where the trucks generally stage at before they try to cross over the pontoon bridge. I didn't see earlier any information about that, but did you see anything about the trucks getting destroyed or how many got hit?
There was a statement that the truck parking lot was targeted near to Dzhankoy, which would actually be a little bit farther down and in the city of Dzhankoy. But as far as them saying a truck parking lot, I'm not exactly sure what they mean by that. Whether it's just a small little pit stop on the side of the road somewhere or a gas station, I wasn't particularly sure on that. But apparently there was some sort of a truck parking area that was targeted over the course of the night by the drone forces.
Yeah, I saw a lot of people last night saying, well, how come Ukraine doesn't hit like the staging area where these trucks are simply parked at? That's apparently what Ukraine tried to do when they hit the pontoon bridge last night. They apparently tried to go for that parking lot as well. The only unfortunate part is we don't know how many trucks were damaged, and we don't know if they exactly hit, the trucks intentionally, or they simply went for maybe the guard shack that was nearby to the parking lot. We simply don't know. But as many people are pointing out, that's a very target-rich environment. Literally all the logistics sitting there in trucks waiting to get hit, basically. So I wouldn't be surprised if Ukraine did strike it.
With those sorts of strikes, like they're decently important to make, but with the Ukrainians and these sorts of actions that we're seeing around the bridges, they're more so a target that can be hit another day. If they don't get hit at the Chonhar Bridge, they're going to turn around because the bridge that they were going to cross over has been knocked out now, both the pontoon and the actual bridge. So they're going to have to turn around and drive back up to Melitopol and then possibly even back over to Mariupol. And somewhere along that highway, there's a very high percentage chance that they're going to fall within the catchment area of another Ukrainian medium-range drone, and they'll get blown up there. So instead of using their drones in a place like that to try and blow up supply trucks, which could get blown up really anywhere else along the M14 highway, they're probably going to divert most of their firepower, and it looks like they probably did, against the pontoon bridges and the bridges within the area to completely deny these trucks the ability to make it to their in-destination point and drop off their supplies there. And regardless of what happens after the fact, it's a pretty decent likelihood that the trucks will eventually get blown up when they're trying to drive on their way back out of the region and back to Rostov-on-Don.
Yeah, maybe so. That could be it, by the way. But also, real quick to go over this, we do have a poll running right now about the warning that Ukraine gave to residents of occupied Russian territories. Once again, Sternenko, who's the advisor to the defense minister of Ukraine, very important fellow there, he told people to evacuate if it's possible, of course. Now, it may not be possible for the Ukrainians in that Russian occupied territory to actually leave or evacuate. It may not be possible, but he's telling them if you can, then leave. Apparently, due to the logistics collapse, and also he seems to be alluding to a possible large Ukrainian operation in the area. So what do you think he meant by that? 56% said Ukraine's planning a massive offensive, and that's very clear at this point. 28% said Ukraine's simply conducting a psyop on the Russians to make them believe that something's about to happen, and 11% said they're 50-50 on this one. And honestly, I would say the Ukrainians would be kind of a little bit foolish not to take advantage of this opportunity. The logistics are going to continue collapsing. That's obvious at this point. Crimea is going to turn into an island, basically. We're going to start calling that the island of Crimea because essentially it's completely isolated to a large degree. So I guess Ukraine just created a brand new island. I guess the world can go ahead and log that in Google Maps. But at the same time, though, the frontline logistics inside of Ukraine and where Russia's operating, they can't get ammo, they can't get food, and I would not be surprised to hear about food shortages very soon on the Russian front lines. So under those circumstances, it is literally perfect ground. And we're also going right into the dead of summer, which is also offensive season to say the least. So I think Ukraine's going to go for it. And I think Sternenko basically said that without saying it in the exact words. So I'm with the 56%. But Enforcer, what say you?
And Crimea just got turned into the island of misfit toys, and the Russians finna get played with by the Ukrainians pretty badly, played like a fiddle. But outside of that, I would say that I'm with the 56%. I think that they're going to be planning a major offensive within the area because strategically, it makes a great deal of sense. This is the time you fight an enemy. You never fight them when they're materially at their best. You fight them when they have nothing left, when they're hungry, when they're sad, when they cried a little, when they, pooped and shit their pants a little out of fear. This is the perfect time to attack. I mean, like, this is literally it right here, right now. The Russians have no supplies to work with. They don't have bullets to shoot with, and they also don't have fuel to maneuver with. So basically, the Russian forces that are there in Zaporizhia, they're fixed in position, which is a technical term of saying they can't go anywhere. They also don't have any ammunition, really, to speak of either. So that means that they cannot shoot at the Ukrainians, at least as much as they would need to, and they also really can't move either. They're stuck in place. That is quite literally the perfect scenario for an attacking force. If you put all of your force, at least strategically, on a single focal point on this front against one regiment that's stuck in place and has no ammunition, it is going to break. Either the men are going to break mentally and they're going to run for the hills, or they're going to surrender, or they're going to be completely destroyed. But once that area becomes a frontline void and the Ukrainians then push into it, they have conducted a classic breakthrough. And that now means that the Russians are in a desperate situation, and considering that no other regiments can maneuver in the area because they also don't have any ability to move, the Ukrainians will be able to just encircle them and then race straight to Melitopol if they made a breakthrough like that. So in my honest opinion, folks, I think that the Ukrainians would be planning for a major offensive at this point because it wouldn't make any sense not to, given the current conditions, especially considering that this is not ever going to change, and this is going to go on for several more weeks or months before they conduct an offensive. By then, the Russians are going to be in such a feeble and weak state in this area that a strong wind will probably get most units to rout and start running for the hills. So I would say they're definitely planning for a major offensive at this point. But moving us on out of that poll, and on into some more interesting news that's come out of the region before we get on into everything else that happened down near Crimea today and elsewhere. We're actually going to be moving on up and into Moscow because this is something that is also starting to become shocking, at least in the progress of the developments that we're seeing within the area of Moscow right now. Today, it has become official that gas is now running out in Moscow and St. Petersburg. Before I show you all this clip, though, I believe I actually have the legitimate statement up here, and I want to make sure that I have it. Here we go. So this is the statement that we're looking for. Fuel sales at gas stations have been restricted in Moscow and St. Petersburg, according to media reports. In Moscow, Tatneft limited sales of octanes 92 and 95 to 20 liters and diesel to 40 liters. At Rosneft, the limit is up to 90 liters, and at Lukoil, it is up to 100 liters for gasoline and diesel. Similar restrictions were discovered in St. Petersburg at Tatneft. Right now, this is showing the first critical supply shortages, which we had already started to hear murmurings of last week, where they were getting very close to the Moscow city area and the Moscow region. This is now the first time that we've been able to confirm that this has happened within the Moscow region, and it already looks like the supply situation might be at a critical level to where they completely run out of fuel here within the very near future. And surprise, surprise, I'm not going to tell you all where this is just yet, but one critical region today has completely run out of fuel. I'm sure many of y'all who can put together the dots know where that one is, but we'll be getting into that one here in just a little bit. But we already are understanding that the supply situation in most areas for fuel has completely collapsed, and it looks like in Moscow it's nearing collapse and it's in a dangerous condition. This video right here actually shows us one of the gas stations in Moscow and them dealing with the reality that most fuels are now limited in only limited quantities, or it's not available at all. And here's that clip.
Так, вот я на заправке нахожусь, Московская область, 100 километров от Москвы, бензина нет.
Right there, actually, it was very hard to notice. Right there, they have the little notes on the handle saying that they're completely out of gas at this station. So this station doesn't have either version, either 92 or 95 octane for sale.
Нет. Так вот, отъехал от той заправки, на которой бензина нет. Вторая заправка, Экопро.
Driving on out into the slum.
Сейчас попробуем.
Also, by the way, man, you gotta love the Russian logic here. They're running low on gas; they really can't hardly get any. And this guy right here is literally driving to the ends of the earth throughout the city of Moscow and this area right here, looking for gas stations. It's like you're going to run out of gas. Obviously, you're driving everywhere.
Man, this guy's like, damn, gas is running out. Well, time to go for a joyride to find gas. Like, where it's like, maybe go home. Maybe that's a better idea.
Посмотреть, есть ли там бензин.
And now he's made it to another gas station.
Там в нефти бензин есть. Но и очередь тут.
We already see that there are lines forming in the Moscow region as well, by the way, for the fuel. So we're already starting to see that the queue lines are being created here as well, much like we saw in the occupied territories, Krasnodar, Siberia, and other regions of Russia, which have already been affected by the fuel shortage.
На полчаса. 100 километров от Москвы.
I heard that this guy has free candy in the van. Don't trust me on that though. I didn't hear that from anybody in particular, but I heard that there's free candy and Wi-Fi in that van right there.
100 километров от Москвы. Новая Рига. Заливает только максимум 20 литров. Но, и оплата за наличный расчет.
You see the line back there still forming a little bit longer than what we saw last. And this guy's walking back to his high-end Mercedes.
Yes, this is definitely near Moscow. That's one way you can tell it right there. I explained that earlier as well. Whenever you see a Mercedes like that and higher end German vehicles, you are almost certainly looking at Moscow. That's where all the people with the money are at, is generally in Moscow. It's pretty much like the only nice major city in the whole country. The rest, there's some other ones like St. Petersburg. They're generally like, they're decent for what's considered Russian standards for the most part. But Moscow is where all the rich congregate, and there's the Mercedes to back it up.
What do they call them? The fifth column of Russia. That's where they're at. The fifth column, the rich ones. We also got to see another clip here showing more proof of the fuel restriction. On the door of the gas station, it says something along the lines of alert to this, and it says right there, a limit of 20 liters for automobiles. And then there's a 40-liter limit for what appears to be diesel for most automobiles. And then I believe that's a 200-liter limit for anybody who has a corporate fuel voucher. So right now, also to explain this as well, there's different rationing regimens or regimes that exist in Russia for different groups. If you were a civilian in an automobile, you were at the very low end of the priority scale. You only get 20 liters of gas, and that's absolutely it. That's 4 gallons of gas, by the way, for everyone here in the United States. If you are driving a truck and it needs diesel, the limit is 40 liters, but that's generally for like smaller businesses and stuff. Most things in Russia don't really use diesel. We then also were able to see that if you have the corporate voucher card, which means that it's a corporate vehicle that has been able to get a voucher from the Russian Federation's government for fuel, you get a limit of 200 liters of diesel, which is way higher than anything that anyone else is getting in any other circumstance. But that's what that letter states right there.
Look at this dude driving an AMG, bro. This thing, also, by the way, I think this might be.
So we have an update on the U.S. Navy Nimitz-class aircraft carrier USS Nemesis is currently near Cuban waters north of the island's country. So, despite its imminent decommission, the carrier is still mission capable. Combat aircraft and munition remain on the carrier. So, I mean, I'm not for sure about what to take about this, or what to think about this, should I say? But I mean, we've been telling Cuba for a while now, but I mean, the Cuban people need help, man. I mean, they're literally sitting there going without electric and all kinds of stuff, man. Literally no electricity. Literally, you walk down the roads and it's darkness. But anyways,
an E63, I think, if I'm not mistaken. I can't see the badge on it. But if that's an AMG right there, that means it's a V8 and it's an absolute gas guzzler right there. I don't know what the exact MPG on it that is, but it's definitely not economy class, that's for sure.
Well, let's see how much he paid for gas. He got exactly 20 liters. That says litre, which is liters in Russian. And he paid 2,000 rubles, which is, I believe, let me think here. It's 100 rubles per dollar right now still. So that's about 20 bucks. 20 bucks for 20 liters. So that's $20 for 4 gallons. That's pretty damn bad. I mean, like, honestly, like, that's rough. $20 for 4 gallons. Wow. That's $5 a gallon. Folks, you know how much I paid the last time I went to a gas station? $5 a gallon. But you know what's crazy is that in Russia, obviously not this guy, he has a Mercedes AMG, but for most Russians, they make 5 times less the amount of money on average that an American makes. So factor that in. This is 5 times more expensive for a Russian at $5 a gallon than it is for us relative to their income. So this would be like us paying, like, say, $25 a gallon based off of how much they're making on their annual income for most average Russians. So that ought to be giving you all an idea. It's unbelievably, impossibly expensive for a Russian to get gas.
And also, by the way, this dude right here with this AMG, that might get him like 50 miles at the maximum, like that amount of gas right there. Maybe 50 miles, maybe. Like that might be pushing it actually for the gas mileage on this car right here. So he might be able to get back home with that.
Man, honestly, you know, he might be able to go and take a girl on to someplace expensive, but I think that means he's just going to be taking him back to the gas station, you know. Man, like, you know, back in the day, folks, they used to say take a girl someplace fancy to woo her when you go on a date, you know, or take her somewhere expensive. Nowadays, that just means driving them to the local Chevron gas station, or for Russia, that means bringing them to the local, like Rosneft or something like that down in the suburbs. But anyways, moving us on out of Moscow, we've also been able to hear that in the midst of this fuel shortage situation, which, by the way, also reached St. Petersburg today as well. This video right here is proof of them telling customers that there's only 20 liters per purchase in St. Petersburg as well. Here's that clip. Diesel sauce.
Diesel sauce, bro. Diesel sauce. I had so many people putting that in my comments section, by the way. I legitimately do not know what the hell diesel sauce even is. I saw some people saying it was DEF, which is an additive that you put in the diesel fuel here in the United States. But I don't know. Like, I've never heard anybody call it diesel sauce before. Like, I have no idea.
Well, Matthew, what the hell are you doing? There's diesel sauce for sale. Look at this. This is Dave's Secret Sauce diesel fuel additive.
Maybe, but that's an American brand, though. I don't think that's in Russia, I don't think. So, I mean, unless they have a comparable one or a similar, like, knockoff, I'm not sure why they'd be calling it that.
I really don't know why either, but apparently, folks, you can get your wings with a side of diesel sauce these days in Russia. Never knew that. That's news to me. It doesn't sound good for the Russians. Sounds like that diesel sauce and that gas sauce be on that low supply. On God, looks like they're going to be eaten dry. We also, by the way, before we get on into the big bombshell thing that came out of Moscow today, this only was repeated in every single oblast around Moscow City, like, or the general area of Moscow City. I'm trying to see where I put that marker down on the map because I did put it down. Let me see here. Russia, man, let's see. Oh, here we are. Here's the following oblast that also had fuel restrictions put in place today as well. Yaroslavl, Volgograd, Nizhnekamsk, Ulyanovsk, Kemerovo, and Karelia, just to mention a few. And that's also included with Moscow, St. Petersburg, and also Rostov, which is starting to get reports that there are fuel shortages in the Rostov Oblast, but that doesn't appear to be oblast-wide yet. We'll show y'all why here in a little bit. Well, actually, we'll just show y'all why now. Down in Rostov, the fact that there are fuel shortages popping up in some cities around the area has led to panic buying at the pumps, and people are loading up every single container they can with gas while there is no limitations in Rostov, which will probably start to go into effect tomorrow.
Also, man, that other dude there was literally out there in his flip flops with these nasty gas cans, like trying to do it. Like it's universal. No matter which country you go to, there's always people trying to hoard stuff when a shortage comes around. Like always, every single time. Also, I see the caption. They used quite an interesting caption here on this post, basically saying it's a mobile car bomb. Essentially, I mean, it's really dangerous. By the way, I mean, I'm obviously those look like they're rated for water. Like those don't even look like they're like gasoline containers. They look like they're rated for normal drinking water, and they're putting gas in it.
Yeah, they don't look like gas cans, do they? They look like water cans. You know, I bet you, man. There's like, and I have a feeling that the whole statement that this is basically making a car bomb is pretty accurate, because it's only going to take one of these clowns not thinking and trying to light a cigarette in their car to turn the thing into a literal like 500 kilogram bomb in the middle of in some city somewhere. That is going to be happening definitely in the future, because like if you see a guy, folks, that's opened up the back of a van and he's loading up an ungodly amount of cans with gas. There's not even enough room to put them all on the floor, so they're just going to be stacked on top of each other in the back of this truck, literally up to the roof. The guy's wearing flip-flops and what appears to be pajamas. That guy is clearly not going to be thinking when he goes to light the next cigarette. Smoking's still a big thing in Russia. And the gas vapors are going to be all up in that car. I can promise you that as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but one bad connection with the electrical wire or something like that, and one of these old jalopies are driving right here, which the odds of it having a bad electrical connection is probably extremely high in these old jalopies. Then it's all over with at that point for that person. Very stupid.
Very stupid. But still showing us that Rostov appears to be getting hit very soon with the announcements of rationing. We haven't seen it yet, but the panic buying is definitely showing us, though, that it's in the air down there. It's known all over. The rationing coming to the Rostov Oblast soon, and with it, we'll most likely see the complete collapse of any supply lines that are left that are still going through the land bridge in southern Ukraine. In the midst of all of that, mind you, I had to get through every single little bit and piece of that to get to this next little bit of news here. In the midst of all of this that's now going on in Moscow and St. Petersburg and the rest of Russia, Putin has stated today that the Russian army is doing fine. In fact, Russia's doing great. They're advancing on all fronts. Let me get y'all into this clip and read off the translation for y'all. Our troops hold the strategic advantage, confidently advancing forward, and no shellings or pilotless strikes will change this situation anymore. The movement is happening in all directions. The enemy cannot contain this onslaught and is shifting to overtly terrorist methods, launching strikes on civilian facilities and communications and passenger transport. Oh.
Also, man, look at the anger on his face, like throughout the whole speech. Like he is pissed off. Like you can tell he's like sneering in the whole thing. Like he is clearly angry throughout this entire speech right here. Also, by the way, delusional. Like this might be one of the most delusional statements Putin's ever made. They literally just retreated from the Kinburn Spit, literally just like less than 72 hours ago or something like that. Just a few days ago, they just retreated from there, and that was a huge story all over the headlines internationally. And he's now saying they're advancing on all fronts, and now he's pissed off saying that. So, I mean, he looks like he's getting to his wit's end at this point.
It looks to me like he is. And I mean, this statement is coming at literally the worst time. Even yesterday, folks, he had to come out and say the Russian army isn't really advancing like we hoped. And then he also had to say a couple of weeks before that, the Russian economy is plummeting into a depression, but it's okay because we did that by design. He's been having to make all of these statements basically explaining away, because at this point it's undeniable even to the Russian public what's going on. He's had to try and explain away all of the failures as, well, they're not that bad, or it was actually intended that it was going to go that badly for a reason because it's all a part of the greater chess plan. It's gotten to the point that it's unbelievable. And today he just decided to wake up and throw caution to the wind and not even admit failures and just say that they're still winning and everything's fine and the drone attacks are doing... He literally pointed out, mind you all, the drone attacks themselves and said that they're not causing any damage. I want to show you all this right here. Right here. no shellings or pilotly strikes will change the situation anymore. He had to mention the drones specifically, because if anybody's giving him an accurate report, they're telling him the drones are literally destroying everything. There's nothing left down in Zaporizhia because of the Ukrainian drone attacks. There's hardly anything left in mainland Russia that's operational that used to make any money for the Russian government, because the Ukrainians have also blown that away with drones. And so Putin decided to come out today and just completely go up against that to the head and say, that's all a lie. The drones are literally doing nothing and we're advancing everywhere and nothing's ever been better. And a lot of people are listening to this right now, and I see a lot of people have been voting on this poll that we have on this topic and are voicing their statements about whether or not Putin is understanding that this is going badly. And Matthew, what are people thinking about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so what do you think about this highly delusional statement that Putin just came out and said today, that Russia's advancing on all fronts, which is so easily disprovable that it's laughable at this point? So, and also not to mention the logistics collapse is also going on as well. But it looks like 58% of the audience said Putin knows it's going very badly, and he's just simply trying to hide it. 20% said Putin truly believes the report that Russia's advancing, despite it being clearly untrue, and 18% say he's being fed bad information by the military, so that way the generals, don't lose their heads, basically. So I would say I went to 57%. You don't come out and make a statement that's supposed to be a positive thing, like, for example, Russia's advancing on all fronts. You don't come out and say, Russia's advancing and we're doing good. It's like, well, why are you so mad if you're doing so good? It's like, why are you so angry? Why are you sneering at the camera? Why are you sounding like you're like on the fringe if you're doing so well? That doesn't even line up. Like his emotions don't even line up. So he knows it's going bad. He's not even getting fed bad information. Like, that's not even an excuse anymore for Putin. He knows how bad it's going. It looks to me like he's getting extremely frustrated that it's going so poorly, and he really can't do anything about it to a large degree. That's why he's angry. But Enforcer, what say you?
I wanted to say I'm with the 58%. This is going badly, and he knows it. He's got to know it at this point. There's no way that he can. I mean, the Southern Front is falling apart in real time. The Russians are running out of gas. The economy is ground to a complete halt, to the point he's even admitted that it's basically in an economic depression, but it's okay because we actually planned for that to happen. I mean, there's no way that he cannot understand that this is going badly, especially with the body language in this statement today. He didn't come out with that whole little deal of, I'm in charge, I'm the chess master kind of an attitude. He came out with an absolutely angry, seething expression. His body language appears to be almost like unhinged, like he's just hardly, holding himself back from a mental breakdown. It looks like he's understanding now the situation is effed. That's basically the only way to describe it. It's over. It's over for the Russians. They can't even keep the economy running at home anymore because they can't get enough fuel around for people to just keep normal life rolling, much less the Russian army. The Russian army isn't even getting a drop of gas at this point or a bullet for their rifles. So if that's the situation, it's over. If you lose the supply side of a war, the war is lost. If you want to look at any good examples of that, just look at any war in history. The winning factor in most conflicts wasn't that the other side, most of the time, had some unbelievable strategic genius, which sometimes does happen, but usually it's because one side is able to eat and get bullets to shoot with, and the other side has nothing to eat and they're starving and they have no bullets. Just look at the Second World War as a very popular modern example. Germany did not have the war production or the supplies like the Allies had to keep the war going. Neither did the Imperial Japanese or the Italians, and that's why they lost that war. Why did Napoleon have to retreat from Moscow in 1814 during the Russian winter? It's because the supply lines were greatly extended beyond their range, and the French army starved and froze to death because they had no way to keep themselves warm, no way to keep themselves fed, and they started to run out of ammunition because they had well marched away from their supply lines in their reasonable range. Every single war where you see a blistering defeat out of the middle of nowhere, it usually comes from a complete lack of supply. And that's what we're about to be seeing here right now. The lack of supply is so obvious, it's undeniable to anyone looking at it, even from this distance right now. A
lack of supply, a lack of logistics, a lack of air defense, a lack of everything for the most part. Is also just to sort of jump back to this for a second. The reason why Moscow and these surrounding regions near the Moscow region are suddenly having such bad fuel shortages, it was already sort of like stewing in the background a little bit because Ukraine's been hitting the central Moscow refineries left and right, and a lot of those refineries are still closed. since the last attacks that Ukraine conducted. So those serve the Moscow area. And when those go out, they can't refine any fuel and deliver it easily to Moscow. They have to start pulling on gas depots that are way outside the Moscow region. So that starts creating a bit of a bottleneck. But the thing that really put it over the edge today that caused the gasoline shortages is in, I think it was, what was it, Volgograd? It was like somewhere, they hit the pumping stations that serve Moscow. There's like a nearby city that has a pumping station in it that pumps all the refined fuel products down to Moscow to serve the gas stations. And that got hit by the Ukrainians last night. And that's why it got so bad today in Moscow that they instituted these gasoline rationing schemes that they put into effect. So that's what happened to it.
Yeah, that definitely is what happened. We're actually going to be getting to that here in just a moment. But moving us on out of that poll, we do have a lot of other major news that has come out of the Russian Federation and Ukraine over the course of the day. But before we get on into the rest of that news and all of the major developments that have happened elsewhere, moving us on really and primarily on into the Leningrad military district news that we got today of the bases that are now being constructed or refurbished along the NATO frontier, I want to make sure that we take a brief pause for a moment because I have to say, folks, that I'm unbelievably shocked tonight and wildly appreciative of so many of y'all being here. We always make this statement every night about at the top of the hour of the first hour into the show, but I got to say tonight, folks, I'm absolutely blown away with how many people are here. We have right now, which is the peak viewership, almost 18,000 people that are here live. Yesterday, we only had 14.4, I believe, and today we have almost 4,000 more people here, and 74,000 people have watched the stream just within the first hour alone. And I gotta say, a humongous thanks to each and every single one of y'all that has been watching so far. We still have a lot of news to go, and a lot of it's as interesting as the first hour that y'all have heard. But before we get on into that, I do want to take a brief moment to get to chit-chat with a couple of y'all, a couple of the amazing folks that make up the viewership of this channel, and answer 3 questions from the chat before we start moving on into the rest of the major news that we have for the night. So, Matthew, what do we got for our first question of this segment?
All right, so we'll grab 3 super chats and get right back to our news. We have massive news on pretty much every front still left to go tonight. Today was a wild day for news, but our first super chat here goes to Ron Fannin, and thank you very much, Ron, for that $50 support, by the way. Hey! And we do appreciate it very much because it's that viewer support that keeps our live stream running for over 4+ years here on the channel. We do appreciate that. And Ron said LSA and take one from the chat.
And a humongous thanks to you for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I gotta say, Ron Fannin, we thank you for being a dedicated member of the Lee Spring Army, one of the soldiers of the Lee Spring Army who helps to support American and Western interests around the world. And I hope that your support helps us to keep this channel running for another 1,571 days. It's kind of crazy to believe this, folks, but this channel has been live on air almost every single day for 1,571 days, which is about 4 years and 4 months of continuous news coverage. The news landscape has changed a lot in 4 years and 4 months. Yet, nevertheless, there are hundreds of thousands of people now who watch this channel to hopefully be the beacon of light in the news world these days, to be able to report the news accurately, succinctly, well analyzed, and to also make sure that the only bias that we enforce here on air is a pro-American and a pro-Western one, looking out for the best interest of the United States strategically around the world, and also the best interest of our allies, as the rising tide raises all ships, as they always say. And I gotta say that, Ron, folks like you and your support, going out of your way to support a channel that you don't have to, has made this thing possible for 4 years and 4 months from all of the amazing people like you, and helps us to make this possible to get out the free news, ad-free and sponsor-free news every single night for the millions of people who watch this show every month. And so we're going to make sure to get a live chat in your honor. So what do we got, Matthew?
All right, so the live chat question is going to go to none other than David Tablet. He said, do you guys think that Russia is facing a humanitarian crisis for civilians for the upcoming winter?
I would say yes. I think that that's probably going to be an inevitable reality. Unfortunately, it's one that's unavoidable. I'm not really a big fan of inflicting suffering on civilian populations like some people are out there, because some people generally say that the Geneva Convention is a joke. I actually believe that war should be fought as civilly as possible. We are a civilized people, so we should fight a war in a civil way. However, it's largely impossible because of how the Russian supply lines work and also how the Russian supply apparatus works to be able to divorce the suffering of the army from the suffering of the civilians and the citizenry of Russia. So unfortunately, I would have to say there probably is going to be a humanitarian crisis coming up this winter for a myriad of reasons, but it most likely will be due to a lack of fuel, a lack of food, a lack of fuel, most likely a lack of heating, and a lack of other basic necessities to be able to make it through those colder winter months. Hopefully it won't be that bad, and maybe we'll be able to see that the situation has turned around so drastically in East Ukraine or the occupied areas that the Russians might even be out of the war by winter. But I would have to be honest with y'all, the Russians being out of the war by this winter is most likely unrealistic, and we'll probably see that they survive into the next year. But beyond that, I don't really know how much farther they're going to be going from there. So I hope that does address that the best I can, and a big thanks to you for sponsoring the live chat, Ron, and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible, and we wouldn't be able to keep it running. And so with that, we are on and into the second question of the segment.
All right, and also real quick, by the way, I am tracking the breaking news, by the way, that some people are mentioning in the live chat right now. There were some reports that sirens were going off inside the country of Jordan in the Middle East. I have no information about why that's taking place, and it appears to be that even Jordanian state TV doesn't know why it's taking place either. So we'll keep an eye on that, but for right now, though, it is a story I'm watching, because we did hear that tomorrow, allegedly, an Iranian-U.S. peace deal is allegedly going to be signed, which we have some big doubts about that. We'll get to that later on in the stream. But Jordan coming under attack, that seems like to be a strange event to take place right before that. So I'll be keeping an eye on that. But for right now, the details are extremely sparse, to say the least. But moving into our next super chat here. This one is going to go to none other than BC Skyman, who puts in a $120 super chat, by the way. And thank you very much, BC, for all those super stickers right there. He threw in the whole plethora, the whole smorgasbord of the super stickers, of the YouTube creature riding the rocket, destroying the city, and also wrecking the city, too. But a huge shout out to you, BC, for once again showing up to another stream. And it's good to see you once again. And also helping to keep the channel running throughout all these years. And Enforcer, what say you?
BC Skyman, good to have you here tonight, and a huge thanks to you for the unbelievable support. You didn't throw in a comment, but that is the BC Skyman way. BC Skyman, if y'all know, folks, I think for like years now, has never thrown in really any comments with his super chats, but we see BC Skyman in the chat all night long, and he has incredibly nice things to say all the time about the channel. He also talks to all of y'all a great deal on the live chat, and he is one of the longest serving old guards of the Lee Spring Army in the channel's history. He's been here since day 4, verified, without a shadow of a doubt. I remember him being here on day 4, and he's been with us basically ever since, almost every day. And I gotta say a humongous thanks to you for that unbelievably massive support, BC Skyman. And BC Skyman said he's working late, but he still made it. And BC Skyman, by the way, folks, works pretty hard, and I would say, especially for the Southeast, heroic job. He's actually an HVAC repairman, and he helps to make sure that the air conditioners and the AC systems of the U.S. Southeast, particularly in the state of Georgia, keep running at a good, decent clip. And down there, as a lot of international guests are beginning to learn from around the world as they've come for the World Cup, the heat becomes unbearable in the summer. As a matter of fact, historically, the heat's so hot down there in the summer that people can actually die in their sleep from heat stroke or myriad of other heat-inflicted injuries that can be caused from the heat down there. And so BC Skyman is helping the people to stay cool and helping some people, especially depending on their age, to stay alive in those kinds of hot weather conditions that you see down there. And I got to say a humongous thanks to you for support, BC Skyman, and helping this channel to keep on running. And it's a good thing to know that you were able to get here onto the show tonight and also support it to help us to keep this thing running. So a humongous thanks to you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And before we get on into the last question segment, well, the last question of this segment, we actually have some breaking news coming out right now. So Matthew, what do we got?
Okay, so I can confirm, returning back to the story about Jordan for a second, I can confirm that sirens were activated inside of Jordan. That's not just a rumor. Apparently they were activated for a short while. That occurred about 30 minutes ago, and since then, we have heard no updates since. So my guess is it was either a false alarm or maybe a test of the system. Now, I will say that's kind of odd to test it and not notify your civilians about that. That's a little bit strange. But right now, I can confirm the sirens went off, but I have no details beyond that. that. So we'll have to keep an eye on it, but it appears to be likely a nothing burger. I would imagine so, but that's just the update to the story right there. So that'll probably round that one out for the moment. So it seems to be probably nothing to be too worried about.
Oh, well, that's good. That's good. Yeah, honestly, I was like, oh my God. I was like, man, wouldn't that be crazy if they were attacking Muafak Salty Air Base again? Wouldn't that be nuts? I mean, I could only imagine.
I wouldn't really expect that to happen, really, because, I don't expect a peace deal to be signed tomorrow. But, Iran and the U.S. is playing that game again where they're kind of like stalling. They're kind of pretending like a deal's around the corner. So for Iran to suddenly launch an attack on Jordan, of all countries, out of the blue, and not the Gulf states, like the other ones closer to the Persian Gulf, it's like, that wouldn't really make much sense. Even in the scheme of the Iranian nonsense, it wouldn't make any sense.
Yeah, honestly, it wouldn't really make a whole load of sense. But one thing we've learned from the Middle East, though, is that the Middle East never makes any sense, especially today. It never made sense before, but nowadays it is quite literally what could be described as a fever dream of decisions and actions. None of it makes any sense at all. But with that in mind, I hope we've addressed that breaking news well. And with that, it's time for us to get on into the last question of the segment, and then move on into the rest of the news that we have from in Ukraine, Eastern Europe, and also the very little bit of news we got out of the Middle East today. So, Matthew, what do we got for this last question of this segment?
All right, so the last one of this segment until we get to the rest of them during our final question segment. This one's going to go to Bobby, also known as LC39A, another channel legend who puts in a $100 support. And thank you very much, Bobby, for once again supporting the channel. He said, I'm here also.
Hey, and Bobby is here also. Are you sure? I'm pretty sure you are. I mean, that super chat, the proof of life, I suppose. But a big thanks to you for your support, Bobby. And good to have you here tonight. I got to thank you for the massive support and helping this channel to keep on running. And since you said that right there, since you said I'm here also, how many other people are also here tonight? Let us know in the live chat, folks. How many of y'all are here tonight? The Lakas, the American Laka. How many American lurkers and international lurkers are here tonight? I'm actually curious. But I got to thank you massively for the support, Bobby, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because folks like you help to make this thing possible and help us to keep this thing running. And I got to say that folks like you and your amazing support makes this entire thing a reality, helps us to keep this thing rolling, and helps us to make sure that millions of lurkers a month are able to enjoy this channel and watch the show. And so humongous thanks to you so much once again. And before we move on into the rest of our scheduled news for the night, we actually have more developments coming out right now, most likely about Jordan. So what do we got?
Okay, so this is actually not about the Middle East right now, but I do have breaking news yet again. I don't think we have this in the news cycle right now. This appears to be new. We have this in the news cycle, you say? Is this a new clip that came out?
Is this Novomoskovsk?
This is the Azot chemical plant.
Yeah, we actually have that in the news. Like, that's coming around here in a little bit.
Okay. Also, do you have this particular video of it, by the way? Because I don't recall seeing this video right here unless I just missed it.
I actually don't have that first clip and the second clip on our Twitter. So once we get the Novomoskovsk, which is here in just a minute, like once we cover the NATO-based thing, we're going to be getting to that. Just make sure to remind me of that so that way we can make sure to show those extra clips. Because we already have 4 individual clips from different angles of that attack. It's just that those two look new.
Interesting. Yeah, that's why I was saying it was breaking news, but I saw this clip here and I was like, what the hell? I was like, it looks like you're going to see this in a second, folks. There's a huge explosion that just took place. Apparently, the Azot chemical plant inside of Russia, Ukraine struck it, and it went up in a fireball of magnificent proportions, to say the least. And a new video shows that just came out right now. So we'll be getting that here shortly, but it's wild to say the least.
And it definitely is, honestly, one of the biggest strikes of the day. So moving us on out of this question segment and also that false alarm breaking news there, because we are about to be getting to covering that here in just a minute. We are going to be moving up before we get to that, up into the northern regions around St. Petersburg, because we've been able to hear something interesting today. And Matthew, get that poll ready. Get that poll ready right now. Wait a minute, hang on. Is this poll right here fresh? Have we not covered this one?
This poll is fresh right here. This one has just started running.
Okay, so before we get on into this news, because we need to cover this one first, because I know we have a poll on the other thing we're about to cover on the NATO business. But right now, a lot of people are talking about the situation that we've already covered in Moscow, about the emergency fuel rationing that's happening in Moscow, St. Petersburg, and a dozen other oblasts over the course of the day. And to make sure that we knock this out so we don't have to return to it in a disjointed way later, the reason why this happened is because at the little little village of Efimovka in the middle of Volgograd. They Eftimovka. And I'm trying to come up with something to make sense here. But in the little village of Efimovka right here, which is basically a non-existent town, there's this giant pumping station right here, which helps to pump fuel to Moscow. This facility got hit today by Ukrainian drone forces and appears to have been knocked out of action. You can actually see the fire there, mostly from Efimovka or a nearby village. You can see the limits on the gas pumps in Moscow, which also happened today as well. And we also have the other clip here, once again showing the still image of the fire over at Efimovka, the pumping station. A lot of people are talking about what's going to be happening once now that the fuel is starting to be rationed and might run out in Moscow here in the near future. And so, Matthew, what are people saying about that, and what are you thinking about that as well?
Okay, so at this point, it's fair to say that the gasoline situation, the fuel situation overall, not just in Crimea and the occupied Ukrainian territories that Russia is currently occupying, at least temporarily, that has become basically a side story, or I would say it's a side story at this point, because now mainland Russia is experiencing a very similar thing. It's like the first stages that we saw in Crimea is now affecting and plaguing the entire Russian mainland, including mainly the most critical place, which is Moscow, the capital. So obviously, it's sort of unclear how that's going to get solved right now, because if the refineries are out, the pumping stations are out, I'm not really sure how Putin's planning on fixing that. We do know that he's generally looking at Belarus a little bit for help, but Belarus is like a small fry. They don't really have a whole bunch of refining capabilities, at least not to replace all of Russia's that they've lost. Certainly not. So what do you think Putin's going to do now as a result of this fuel rationing that started? 52% said it's going to be simple. The Russian civilians are going to get feisty. The Muscovites are not going to handle that. 23% said Putin will do something crazy to distract from it inside of Ukraine, and 19% said Belarus will supplement the losses. And we do know now that Belarus is currently shipping fuel to Russia, but it's like a drop in the bucket. It's like, I guess, like best wishes or something like that. It's not going to fix the problem by any means. So Belarus is helping, but, I've seen these headlines out there, by the way, that apparently the mainstream media is calling Belarus Russia's new gas station. That is overblowing that significantly. That is like really misrepresenting how it's actually working right now. Belarus is simply barely giving anything. So it's a nothing burger. I would say personally that at this point, Putin doing something crazy, I mean, what can he do? Launch another IRBM Oreshnik? He's already done that several times, and that's lost its luster at this point. They're not really scared of the IRBM anymore in Ukraine. So I think the Russian civilians are going to get feisty. All those people with the AMG Mercedes in Moscow, they're going to be bitching very loudly very soon. And I think Putin's either going to start putting those people down like he loves to do normally, or they're simply going to rise up against Putin and he's going to have a crisis on his hands. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that in my honest opinion, the folks in Moscow ain't going to be happy. They're going to be getting very unhappy. They're used to a high quality of life, and so if anything impedes on that high quality of life, and I'm saying high quality of life relative to the rest of Russia, in most places in the world, the high life in Moscow would be considered middle class or lower, like upper, lower class for most other areas of the world, like here in America. But they are expecting that high quality of life. And when it gets taken away, people usually get very unhappy about that kind of stuff. So I have a feeling they're going to be getting pretty feisty up there in Moscow and St. Petersburg, which is also very similar to Moscow in that degree. So moving us on out of that bit of news in Moscow, it's now time for us, folks, to get on into that new news that we're going to be getting on into up here near to the Leningrad Military District. I know that many of y'all like to talk about that Leningrad Military District. And the Leningrad Military District is an incredibly interesting creation that is showing us a clear intention of the Russian Federation's greater strategic ambitions at this point in day in the war. Let me show you all this here really quickly. The Leningrad Military District. The Leningrad Military District was decreed by presidential decree by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, on the 26th of February of 2024. It organized the northern part of the Russian Federation near to the Leningrad area, as it's now called St. Petersburg, into a separate military district. This is actually what it looked like during the times of the Soviet Union. So let me get you all a more modern map of what it looks like right now. And let's see here. I want to make sure, hold up. Here we are. So here's the recreation of the Leningrad Military District as it exists today. Notice something important about it. Every single region that's in the Leningrad Military District touches a NATO border. Norway up here at the very north, Finland throughout the rest of this area through here, the Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania through here, and Poland via Kaliningrad. This is also something that's very interesting as well, if you notice this, about the prior iteration of the Leningrad Military District. As it stood in 2010, it did not include Kaliningrad. That was actually, I believe, under a separate military command. So if y'all notice this, when it was abolished, I believe in like 2014, when they did the major restructuring of the Russian armed forces, and then they brought it back in 2024, they made sure to add Kaliningrad into the same military district. The reason why they did that, folks, is because the Leningrad military district is purpose designed for an eventual war with NATO. It shares all of the borders with NATO. Moscow doesn't. The southern military district doesn't. The only one that does is Leningrad. That's why Kaliningrad was added on to it, so that we would be under the same unified command for that eventual war with NATO. And we have seen that as of today, a bombshell report has come out on the situation of the Leningrad military district, and it is one of interesting concern. Russia is modernizing and building entirely new military bases along the NATO border, all the way from Norway down to the Kaliningrad Oblast. An NRK article published as part of a joint investigative report with the Swedish SVT, the Danish DR, and the Estonian Delphi reveals that Russia is rapidly expanding and modernizing its military infrastructure along its western border with NATO countries, with a particular focus on the areas right next to the Norwegian border in the far north. Russia is building new barracks, housing for soldiers and their families, storage halls, vehicle repair facilities, and other infrastructure at multiple sites. This is happening even while Russia is heavily engaged in the war in Ukraine. Western intelligence agencies, including Norway's, are described as having been surprised by the scale and speed of this work. The most prominent example is in the Pechenga Valley on the Kola Peninsula in Russia's Murmansk region, only 11 kilometers from the Norwegian border near Kirkenes. Satellite images have shown that new apartment buildings have been built, 5 buildings with about 180 apartments. Barracks and other housing have been constructed, along with storage and maintenance facilities, and large areas of forest have been cleared for construction around the facility. Analysts say that the single complex could eventually house up to 17,000 soldiers, which is several regiments of the Russian army, significantly more than before. Similar construction activity has been documented in many other sites along Russia's 2,424-kilometer-long border with Northern Europe, from the Arctic all the way down to Kaliningrad. Experts estimate that once the war in Ukraine ends, Russia could station around 115,000 additional troops near its borders with NATO's northern members. The article frames this as Russia preparing for a possible future confrontation with NATO. Not an immediate attack, but laying the groundwork for a stronger posture in the coming years. The estimate range 2 to 5 years after the Ukraine war ends. Norway's Chief of Defense, Erik Kristofferson, has warned that if Russia completes this buildup, the military threat to Norway will increase significantly, obviously. Norwegian intelligence had previously assessed that Russia would not be able to build up forces while fighting in Ukraine, a view that is now starting to change because of these recent developments. NATO officials and Nordic military leaders described it as a significant escalation and huge upscaling, though they note Russia is still primarily focused on Ukraine for now. Russia's official position is that all these measures are defensive and that it has no intention of attacking NATO. Mind you all, the only way that we've seen, or really the only window we've seen in this larger bombshell story that came out today, was the satellite footage that came out from around Petrodolsk yesterday, showing a brand new construction area that the Russians are working on to build a brand new military facility that will be able to house an additional 6,000 military personnel, which is about the equivalent of 2 Russian infantry regiments. This is giving us a clear indication that the Russians are building up large amounts of additional base plants and facilities throughout the whole of the NATO frontier to be able to prepare for an eventual war with NATO. That is increasingly concerning. It is showing us that the Russians are working strategically on every level to eventually face down and go into a conventional war with NATO at some point within the distant future. Well, really the near future, honestly, if we're speaking frankly about this. And a lot of people are wondering what is up with this and what is the real intention behind this rapid construction of military bases throughout the entirety of all Russian regions that border the NATO frontier. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about that? What are you thinking about that as well?
All right, so this is actually a pretty big deal because, like the enforcer just mentioned, yesterday we covered the base that Russia was building up. I believe it's on Finland's border. We covered that one, and generally speaking, it was a little bit interesting, but I was like, it is what it is. Like sometimes Russia does stuff like that. But this bombshell report that came out today apparently alleges that Russia is expanding all of its bases on NATO's border. So that's a much bigger problem than that simple one base near Finland. That's a very much bigger problem. So there's only a couple reasons that Russia would do that, and they're not very good. But let's see what the audience thinks. 65% said Russia is trying to intimidate NATO, and that's all they're trying to do is intimidation, while 19% said Russia is planning to invade NATO soon with those bases, and 11% said Russia is expecting NATO to invade Russia. And I think what we're seeing here, which also lines up with all the previous intel reports from Europe and all these European countries, is that in the future, it could be in a couple of years or it could be in maybe just a year possibly, Russia is planning on aggressing against the Baltic states by either launching missiles, drones, etc. into those territories and terrorizing them essentially. And then they're building up these bases to protect their border in case NATO decides to respond to those provocations. So me personally, I do not think these bases are an offensive operation. I think they are defensive like Russia is claiming. But the problem is, though, NATO would never try to attack Russia on the ground or any way whatsoever unless it was purely defensive. NATO's not an offensive alliance. It's purely defensive. So this idea that Russia keeps putting out there that somehow they're having to build up defenses against, NATO, which is not offensive, is silly to say the least. So I would say Russia's expecting a NATO retaliation after they decide to attack the Baltic states, and that's why they're expanding these bases. So I'm actually with the 12%. Russia's expecting NATO to do something against Russia. That's what's going on here. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would say that I would be with the 64%, at least for now, and I would be with the 19% in the future. This is with the intention of eventually creating a war with NATO. We know that that's the Russians' wild card kind of final solution sort of a thing, if we want to call it that, not to bring any reference to the World War II deal, but that's kind of their final solution to the crisis that they're in right now about the Ukrainians are curb stomping us. NATO's just sitting by and watching it and supporting it, and we got to come up with some sort of a desperate solution to turn the situation around before the Russian government completely implodes because of how badly everything's going. That's probably why they're doing this right now, because if you think about it, folks, it's a lot easier, and it also allows for them to start off a war a lot quicker with a greater element of surprise if the forces are already based at facilities that are just miles away from the border and have been there for a little while at that point, rather than moving a whole bunch of guys in and then clearing out some forests to create some temporary fobs that will be seen from satellite, and then they go, hey, wait a minute. What's up with these 200,000 Russians that just showed up on the border of the NATO frontier within the last 2 months? And there's dozens of these fobs everywhere that have thousands of troops in them. What's up with that? And clearly, all of the example that we got from the war in Ukraine, that's a prelude to invasion. That's the very same thing they did. They just popped up a whole bunch of temporary fobs along the Ukrainian border in Belarus and the Russian frontier, and the Russians claimed it was a part of a war game until they invaded Ukraine on the 23rd of February. And that's what I believe that they're doing right now. Because they build a whole bunch of these structures and facilities. We're seeing that they're only a little ways away from the Ukrainian, really the NATO border, to correct myself there. And if they said, okay, we're going to war with NATO, they only have to roll right out of the fob and they're right on the NATO border, or they roll right out of their facility and they're right on the NATO border. I would say that it is purely defensive in design, and this is trying to create some plausible deniability in the future when the forces start building up and they go, hey, wait a minute, what's up with this? We're now noticing a great deal of increased activity by satellite at these facilities. The Russians go, oh, it's just finally moving troops in. Don't worry, purely defensive, just like they did with Ukraine, because they know something that won't work with the West that did work with Ukraine. If they build up troops out of the blue like they did on Ukraine, the old saying goes, fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, shame on you. Or something along those lines. I think it's the other way around, isn't it?
No, you got it right.
Okay. So they fooled the Ukrainians into thinking that they were conducting a war game on their border. They know they're not going to fool NATO with that. Not that NATO is ever going to operate offensively, but if they see a whole bunch of fobs getting set up along the borders of the NATO frontier, you know what NATO's going to do? in the weeks and months leading up to Russia invading, they're going to move a whole bunch of forces to meet the Russians head on once they try and cross the border, and NATO would have the time to be able to react to that. So they have to come up with something that makes it where the forces are already there, they look like they're supposed to be there, so that way if an offensive is launched, they get right in the trucks and drive across the border, and it was basically status quo up until that point. So I would say that, in my honest opinion, folks, I'm with a decent majority that this is for intimidation, but I think that this is going to be turning into an eventual offensive or a war against NATO. And I know a lot of people are going to say, well, how will they fight that? How will they win it? There's no intention of winning that war. It's about putting NATO into a nuclear standoff to where they have to get concessions or face some sort of nuclear conflict at the tactical or the strategic level, which is generally something that everyone wants to avoid. And if Putin really makes it look like he's willing to do that, then we might see that a lot of NATO leaders back off and give significant concessions to the Russians.
But you don't think that Russia's going to start a ground operation against those states, do you? Like, I mean, me personally, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a ground operation. At least not initially, it won't. But they're putting those troops there so that way, just in case, like for example, if Russia decides to put a couple of missiles in Estonia, like lob a couple of them in a major city or something like that, and be like, we'll do what we want. Screw you, NATO. Then they're putting those troops there so that way NATO doesn't feel emboldened to act against Russia in a defensive manner.
I would say that they might. Like, I don't think it's out of the question. Like, you really can't discount anything from the Russians these days, because if you think about it, and if we look at the NATO force disposition map, there's not really a lot up there. I mean, like, if Russia sent a regiment across the border, like, say, near to Voru, this brigade up here, which is, kind of like half conscript, it's going to be caught off guard. I'm like, they're going to, like, the Russians would be able to get a good bit of ground in an opening offensive if they completely caught NATO unawares, per se. They would be able to get a good bit of ground before they were stopped. Like, I think that's the thing that everyone keeps discounting with the war right now, is that they're looking at the Ukrainian front line, which is heavily founded. Like, it's well founded. That front line has troops to the nines on both sides. So if the Russians try and push anywhere into a Ukrainian front line, they're meeting resistance immediately. If you push into NATO right now and they're caught completely by surprise, there is no resistance to speak of once they cross the border for a good bit. They would have to run into an actual brigade somewhere in the open fields of Estonia somewhere, which would probably be a little bit farther into the country before they're stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would agree with you though on that. Like, I wouldn't discount anything, because I know I see some people in the chat right now saying, "Come on, guys! Like, Russia doesn't have the manpower; they don't have anything to be able to attack NATO like on the ground." Me personally, I think a ground invasion is kind of a bit unlikely, but I wouldn't rule it out completely. But you have to remember though that right now the path that Russia is on, it's almost similar to the collapse of the USSR to a certain degree, because the report came out today that Russia is spending like almost half of their entire federal budget on fighting Ukraine alone. They're spending literally half of their money that they're taking in as the Russian Federation on just fighting Ukraine, and it's going literally nowhere. In fact, Russia is now going in the negative at this point. They're losing ground that they'd already previously gotten. So, I mean, if you're in Putin's position and you see yourself about to get basically ousted because it's going so badly and the Russian civilians are getting tired of it and they finally reach their dead end, like, end of the rope basically, then, I mean, what do you do at that point? As Putin, do you simply walk away and simply take off to China, which that seems a little bit unlikely, or do you take it to the extreme and start something crazy like attacking NATO, so that way the civilians don't focus on the issues that Putin's caused, and instead they start focusing on survival, because now NATO's knocking at their door because Putin just caused an absolute chaos of a situation.
Also, I see some people saying in the chat, but the Russians can't win. Y'all aren't seeing it. Y'all aren't seeing the vision. They don't have to win. They just have to engage NATO forces. That's all. Like, the idea, like, and you have to think outside the box here for a minute, folks, on a doomsday type strategy where you're just trying to force a life or death scenario onto NATO. You don't have to win. You just have to be able to engage the enemy. So let's put ourselves in the Russian minds, right? At the beginning of the war, before Ukraine even happened, the Russians had no chance in hell of winning against NATO. They still have no chance in hell of winning against NATO. The only thing that's changed is that they don't really have any tanks to speak of at this point. But outside of that, if they get enough gas together, and they got enough men, and they got just enough ammunition, you can drive across the border into the Baltic states and into the Swolki Gap, because there's nobody there right now actively on a front line stopping them. And you might be able to sit there and hold and engage the enemy for some time. If you do that, The Russians know that they're going to lose. They would have lost in 2022 if they had invaded NATO instead of Ukraine. The thing is, however, is that now nuclear-armed Russia is in a conflict with the nuclear-armed NATO forces. And now we're at an impasse. If NATO is clearly going to counterattack and start pushing the Russians back. They might be able to hold for a couple of weeks, but they're going to get pushed back. Once they start getting pushed back, the Russians can start whipping out the victim card. Oh my God, this is an existential threat to our state. You're going to destroy us. It's going to be an unconditional surrender. We're going to nuke all of you. We're going to kill everybody in NATO. So if you don't give us what we want, or you don't end up giving us something reasonable at least, where it's kind of a compromise, we're going to kill everybody. That's what the Russians are going to say. And then all of the NATO leaders, all of the NATO government heads, and all of the NATO states are going to be going, oh my God, like, it was insane to even invade us. He might be insane enough to start nuking battlefield forces. Like in, say, the Baltic states, for example, he might start dropping tactical nukes on them. If they drop tactical nukes, we have to start dropping tactical nukes. If we're all dropping tactical nukes, it's not going to be long before all of the armies are largely wiped off of the map and someone's going to be left standing. Then the strategic nukes start flying, and that's when they go, oh shit, maybe we need to compromise with them. That's the Russians' mindset right now. That's what I've been saying for years. If they ever get to an absolutely horrific position, they might try and pull something like that. We have to consider that.
The ultimate brinksmanship right there. That would probably be the most extreme form of brinksmanship that's ever been conducted in geopolitics if Putin decided to take it to that point, which it basically comes down to this. Do people think that Putin is the type of person to simply walk away if he starts losing, or is he the person to try to take everybody down with him? And the way I judge Putin is he seems like the latter. He seems like the type of person that's going to try to take everybody down with him, because if he can't have it, he's going to destroy everybody else in the process. That's the way his type of personality works. So I don't rule that kind of stuff out. Like with him, I don't rule it out.
And if we look at it, remember, folks, you have to look at it from a personal level of Putin. The government is unstable right now in Moscow. Like, in the current condition it is right now, it's not being threatened yet, but it's very unstable. If the Russian public starts to rise up, there's always the chance that the military might join them. If the military joins them, Putin is going to be put on a show trial, and he's going to be shot right outside of the Kremlin by an AK, just like Nicolae Ceausescu was in Romania, or any other Soviet leader, or, for example, that lost some sort of a coup. He's going to die. He's going to be executed. So, from his personal position, considering that Russia is basically just his suit of armor, what in the world does he have to stand for at that point if he's going to get executed in a coup, and he might not be able to flee into exile somewhere because no one might take him? If he has nowhere to go and he's going to die anyways, what difference would it make for him if he dies in a nuclear hellfire, getting 2/3 of the planet killed in the process, or if he gets killed in a coup? He's dead either way. So he might as well play the most risky option, which is going to war with NATO and risking a nuclear conflict, because at least then there's a chance out. They might give significant enough concessions that his government stabilizes, they're able to put down the coup if it happens, and then he's able to stay in power until he dies. The other option is he's going to die either way. So, at least with the NATO war option, he has a chance of survival and possibly remaining in power. And that's why I'm saying here, folks, that's the part of this where you have to say it's not completely impossible that they could go to war with NATO. It's never going to be winnable, obviously. I agree with all of y'all on that. But when you look at it that way, there's a decent risk that could happen. But that's why we have to act proactively to make sure that something like that doesn't happen. We need to put up enough of a strong deterrence to make it clear that if the Russians even try that, it's not even going to be worth it at all, because it's going to just end in complete destruction anyways. So you might as well just face whatever the coup is going to be, because either way, he's going out. I would probably work on that sort of mindset, because any other way, it's not going to succeed. But anyways, moving us on out of that, because that was a pretty lengthy rabbit hole, but I hope I explained the position well, and I'll let you all see it from my shoes of what I've been thinking for a couple of years as to how that could go. We also did get to hear today, if I can get that out properly, that Ulf Kristofferson, who is the Prime Minister of Norway, stated the following. Actually, let me check that. No, he's actually Prime Minister of Sweden. I'm so sorry, everyone. Twice on the same.
Damn.
Oh, God.
Oh, man. get heat for that.
I'm about to get flamed by the Swedes. How do you get that? I'm sorry, folks. I don't know why I said he was Norwegian. It literally says Swedish PM right there. Anyways, twice on the same day, the Swedish intercept incident preparedness unit scrambled Gripen jets to intercept Russian fighter aircraft near Swedish airspace. The recurring Russian behavior over the Baltic Sea is serious. The Air Force's rapid response demonstrates why readiness is required every day. This time, there was no violation of Swedish airspace, but the incident shows how quickly the situation can change and how important it is for Sweden, together with our allies, to detect, identify, and intercept Russian fighter aircraft in order to secure our own airspace. Moving us on out of that news, which is also a part of the continuous Russian low-level escalations in the area, we also got to see that down in the area of Tula, in the midst of the ongoing drone attacks overnight, there was a decent incident that happened in this area. There is a large chemical plant here called the Azot chemical plant, which produces a decent amount of chemical products which help the Russians to be able to produce munitions for the war effort. The facility was attacked by Ukrainian drones and destroyed almost outright. Here's one of those drones coming on in the early morning.
Пизда!
Pizda, boy.
Ебать!
Oh wow, they're all got it.
Пиздец!
Look at that. Right overhead.
Ебать!
Man, it's like the chorus back here. They're back here harmonizing. Oh, you bad, you bad.
Do it with me, comrades. Ебать, ебать. Man, like it's right, bro. They getting into a song.
Слушайте.
Then we saw the impact, which gets us on into one of the fresh clips that we got while we were on the show. Here's the impact.
Стреляли нахуй.
Damn. And that's the clip right there. I was saying I thought it was breaking news, but I hadn't seen it yet. That was the Azov plant getting hit. That explosion was crazy large. That must have been the nitrate or the fertilizers or something going up, because that was way bigger than that drone would ever produce.
Bro, this guy tweaked immediately. Listen to him.
Стреляли нахуй. Ебать!
Damn, man. You hear that? Like the video cut like right as the shockwave was hitting the guy's window. That might have busted that guy's window out.
Man, honestly, I think it probably did. I mean, it was an unbelievable hit. And then right after that, we got to see. Well, actually, I think we have that clip. Hold up, let me check that. Let's see. Is it this one? No, it's not. Actually, we don't have this clip. So here is the. Wait a minute, hang on. That is the drone flying clip that we just watched. So that's a duplicate, actually. So moving us on out of that. And it also looks like we have something of a Rabin switch we'll get to here in a minute. But we were able to see the fire from a distance at the chemical plant.
That's after the huge explosion that we saw at night.
Yes, that is the continued fire and explosion from the chemical plant.
Jeez, man, it's lighting up the day sky like it's nighttime.
Man, it's honestly lighting up like it's a sunrise over there. So you got like the red hue and everything of a sunrise in the morning.
Yeah, really. That's wild. It's literally like a dawn, and it's like lighting up like a sunrise. That's crazy.
Man, it's it's mental, honestly. And then we got another clip here showing us from the city of Novomoskovsk, the fire from a distance and the smoke that was rising from it. You hear kind of the roar.
Man, that looks toxic. Like that.
Definitely looks toxic. But that is all the news that we have for y'all for tonight. I hope y'all enjoyed the show. I hope y'all drop that bell or hit that bell button so you get notified whenever we come on air. And please drop a follow or a subscription, depending on what platform you're on. It helps us get it helps our videos get pushed out on the channels more, so we don't get held back by the algorithm. But yeah, if y'all can actually help us out and share the videos and please like the videos, it helps us get out more. But we have live call-ins here every night, so if y'all are just dropping in, please feel free to give us a call whenever we come on air. Like I said, we are live right now, and we are about to go off air though. That is all the news that we have for y'all for tonight. I hope y'all enjoyed the show.